I don't know if you caught it in here, but the second sentence where it has the phrase violence from small arms,
Mm-hmm.
you know what came to mind there? Peter Dinklage in a fist fight.
Not that kind of small arms.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a podcast about guns, hunting, competition, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 124, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee, cooksholsters.com. Again, welcome to the show. Thank you for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week. Today is Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. I am not celebrating today. We celebrated our Father's Day yesterday on Saturday at the range at Mission 160, followed by ice cream at Dairy Queen. Kind of a sad day here at the Armed Lutheran compound. I had to drive my wife and daughter to the airport this morning for them to fly to North Carolina to take care of ailing family members. They'll be gone for a couple of weeks, so please keep them and my wife's family in your prayers. I would certainly appreciate that. Pastor Bennett and I got together this week, recorded a segment for Clinging to God and Guns about the Methodist Church and their stance on gun rights. It was in response to an incident that happened to Derek LeBlanc from the Kids Safe Foundation. I was in a Facebook Live interview with Derek earlier this week talking about that incident, and we thought we would fisc the resolutions of the United Methodist Church with regards to gun violence. That interview ended up being so long that I just couldn't trim it down to fit into our normal segment length without stripping away so much good stuff that it wouldn't be worth it. So next week's entire show is going to be devoted to airing that information, and today is all about dads. Many of us have fond memories of being outdoors, hunting and fishing and boating, biking, hiking with your dad. Well, I don't. My dad was never the outdoorsy type. It wasn't in his wheelhouse, so to speak. It just wasn't who he was. I didn't spend my formative teenage years with him. My parents divorced when I was 12. I visited during the summers, and he had guns in the house. He had guns with family history behind them. A muzzle-loading Revolutionary-era musket, a World War II Enfield 303 that was brought back from World War II, an old bolt-action 22 that was his great-grandfather's, which I now have in my safe. He even carried a German-made World War II Luger in his car when he traveled. I remember that as a kid. And I remember staying at his house one summer, working a summer job there at Duke Hospital, and Dad had made his annual summer pilgrimage to the mountains to visit the ancestral home place, and while I stayed behind to work, so I found that 22 rifle, and I found a box of shells, and took it out back into the woods, and I set up a target in the bank of the creek back there, and the first round I fired blew out the rim of the case and peppered my face with powder and scared me to death. And I kind of limped back home and put the gun back in the closet and never spoke of that incident again. I learned gun safety from my late uncle. I was given a Marlin 60 rifle, which I still have, and I've taught my daughter and my son to shoot when they were old enough. Taught the 4 rules of gun safety by my late uncle. Never forgot them. For this Father's Day, I thought I would share a story, though, about my dad. Interestingly enough, And I've told the story before. I wrote about it back in 2012, the first month of the blog. I think I mentioned this on the podcast at one point. Dad was born and grew up on a little branch of the Tow River in the Tow River Valley of western North Carolina called Bailey Branch, interestingly enough. We actually have family here in Texas, as it turns out, somewhere down around Bend, Texas, as I understand it, but that's another story for another day. Dad is big into family history. He's written a 12-volume, I think it's up to 12 now, 12-volume series of books called The History of the Tow River Valley, with tons and tons of pictures and information about long past family members and ancestors, lots of documents and all kinds of cool stuff. He would visit the old homestead every summer at least, and we would wander around the back 40 visiting relatives and poring over dusty old books and records and through libraries and courthouses, or searching for long-lost family cemeteries. That's as much of the outdoors as we got, basically, was digging around, finding old headstones and old family cemeteries. I remember visiting my grandfather's house when I was really small. This will give you an idea of just what kind of a place this was. I remember we had to spend the night. It was the middle of the winter. This was before my dad had updated the house with a new roof and indoor plumbing. So at that time, if you had to go, the bathroom in the house was just that, a bathroom. If you wanted to take a bath, that's where you did it. If you needed to answer the call of nature, you used what we called the two-holer out back, which was an outhouse built for two. I still remember the sound of that screen door on the front porch opening and closing, the smell of the living room, which was the most used room in the house. It had this worn-out linoleum on the floor on probably a single layer of wood floor, no insulation at all underneath. There was a black and white TV on one side of the room, and the other side of the room was a couple of kind of worn-out couches, and in between the couches, as the two couches faced each other, was the sole source of heat for the entire house. It was an old wood stove, and the paneling on the walls in that room was just black with soot from years of use. The bedroom we slept in that night had no heat, as did the rest of the house. As I said, the only room in the house that had any heat was the living room. So you were covered up with so many wool blankets that once you got in bed, you could not even roll over. You had like 5 or 6 layers of wool blanket. Anyway, across the creek from Grandpa's house was, for many years, Grandpa's sole source of income, which was a tobacco field. He raised tobacco, harvested it, dried it, hauled it to market. Eventually, once his health made that life impossible, he leased that land to a farmer who kept his cattle on that land where the tobacco fields used to be. And my dad had built a house there. He actually found an old log house that had belonged to one of our relatives or ancestors. And it was basically just a pile of logs. Think of a pile of Lincoln logs. And he bought the whole thing and brought it to Bailey Branch and restored it right across the creek from my grandpa's house. Don't think of like an old-timey, from the outside, old-timey, log house. Inside, all the modern amenities, all the modern heat and electrical appliances and running water and bathrooms and all that stuff. It was a nice little place. So staying in hotels or in Grandpa's house just wasn't real comfortable, so he rebuilt the log house as a place to stay during his visits. There's 2 events, both related to Father's Day, that happened at that house. In 2000, when my wife was pregnant, we stayed at that house, and we came to the branch to visit my grandpa, who was not expected to live much longer. He'd been brought home to die, essentially, around, in his old home, surrounded by family. And he was barely lucid. I don't think he didn't speak more than a word the whole time we were there. And the one thing that stands out from that night sitting with my grandfather, on the last night of his life, as it turned out, he turned to my wife and looked at her and took her hand and said, "Baby." It was the only word he said the whole time we were there. And I remember my wife kind of squeezing his hand and patting him, and yeah, we're having a baby, Grandpa. And that's the last thing I ever heard him say. And that was the last day of his life. Of course, it was too late that night, as I said, for us to drive back. It was a 2-hour drive down the mountain to where we lived at the time. So we stayed the night at the log house. And in the middle of the night, my wife's water broke. And we made a mad scramble to get to the closest hospital, which was almost an hour away. And 13 hours after that, I was a father. Flash forward 12 years to the day when my son and I joined my dad in the field outside that house for a day of shooting. It was the only time in my entire life that I've been shooting with my dad. I had introduced my son to shooting at age 9, almost 3 years earlier, starting him off with 22 pistols and rifles. He'd even taken a liking to my 9mm and 45 caliber Glocks. At that point, he had a 1022, a Ruger 1022 of his own. So we packed up a few guns and headed up to spend some time with Dad and a couple of my brothers, and pasted up some reactive targets onto some cardboard boxes and set them out in the cow pasture. Now, don't worry, there were no cows in the cow pasture at that point. They'd been all carted off to auction, leaving a nice big gigantic field full of cow patties and mud. So we set them on the other side of the pasture, and then we stood on the far side near the house, basically in the yard, shooting across the pasture at those targets. I soon discovered that I was in a very uncomfortable position teaching my elderly father, who's in his 70s by this point, the basics of firearm safety. Before we began, we did, what we always do. We put on our eyes and ears, and I brought extra earplugs and extra protective glasses for anybody else who wanted to join us. But my father and my brothers waved them off. The look on my son's face, because I drilled this into him, the look on his face was funny. And there were a number of those looks throughout the day. I recited, if you go to my website, I've got the 10 Commandments of gun safety on my website. And I recited the 8th commandment to him, always wear ear and eye protection, right? And I continued to offer those items, and finally convinced my brother to take a pair of earplugs and a spare pair of glasses. But Dad wasn't having it. Okay. All right. So we started plugging away with my son's Christmas present, which was this. He's got a Ruger Tactical 1022. It's got a composite stock and rails and stuff on it for mounting things, and an adjustable 6-point stock so you can adjust the length of pull. It's got a pistol grip and all of that good stuff. So that's what he wanted. And he decked it out with all kinds of knickknacks and scopes and stuff. So we brought that out, and a couple of handguns that I brought, and the targets were a little too far away for us to hit consistently with the handguns. And my dad had his Luger. We didn't want to get any closer and essentially stand in the middle of the cow pies. So we shot across the pasture from my dad's yard. And it was kind of a tough shot. I would say it's beyond 50 yards. Probably a bit much, especially for a couple of concealed carry handguns that I had brought in my dad's Luger. Dad is convinced that the Luger is phenomenally accurate even out to 100 yards, but we couldn't prove that. So Dad decided that maybe a better place for us to shoot was to set up a target, basically just take an old, cut the bottom out of an old milk jug and set it on top of a metal fence post that was ringing the pasture across the road, not the pasture we were shooting across, but one that's across a paved road. So not only was this a good idea, he thought, he's done this before many times, firing across a paved road at a target sitting on top of a metal post. So I recited my 4th commandment, which is the 4th rule, basically, be aware of your target and what's beyond it. So after a little bit of discussion, I finally convinced him that probably wasn't such a great idea. But his next suggestion, he guaranteed, was much better. We'll set targets on some concrete watering troughs in that pasture, again, shooting across the road. So again, fourth rule came out. I feel like I had said it 100 times at that point and finally convinced him that shooting across the road, no matter what we were shooting at, bad idea. Shooting at targets sitting on top of a piece of concrete, bad idea. So we decided we would venture out into the pasture a little bit, get a little bit closer, and see if we couldn't make the shots at the targets that we already have a little bit easier. So we did that for a few minutes. Then we returned to the porch of the cabin to sit down and reload. And here, Dad surprised me again. He pulled out his own Ruger 10/22, just a stock, wood stock 10/22, no scope, no nothing, just bare bones, standard Ruger 10/22. And he proceeded to load that thing up and prop it on the porch rail for stability and shoot rounds at our targets that we'd set up across the pasture, essentially through the limbs of a nearby tree. So I repeated the fourth commandment. I don't know. I was sure at this point I was talking to myself because nobody seemed to be listening. My son, the look on his face was great. He couldn't believe that my dad was doing this. I couldn't believe my dad was doing this. So finally came out my dad's Enfield 303. I've never fired a gun larger than a 22 at that point, so I was excited to give it a try. I'd never shot an AR. I'd never shot an AK. So here was a World War II battle rifle. And my dad brought it out and proceeded to muzzle everybody on the porch repeatedly, back and forth. Even though it was unloaded, it was unnerving, and I had to keep reminding him of the muzzle over and over and over again. And finally, one of my brothers even commented on it. So I'd gone through Commandment 1 and Commandment 2, keep your finger off the trigger, don't point at anything you're not willing to kill or destroy. It was like talking to a brick wall. But I got to shoot it. We didn't shoot through the tree limbs, at least. Got to shoot my dad's Luger, which was interesting. I'd never shot one of those before. But that particular gun, at the time, I'm sure he's repaired it now, but it's kind of showing its age. And it doesn't go to the range. It doesn't get regular gunsmithing or cleaning. And one of the grips is kind of messed up, and it causes the magazines to stick. So you have to remove the grip panel to eject the magazine. It will come loose from the magazine release, it pops, but it won't come out. And so the only way to get it out is to take one of the grip panels off. And while he was doing this, Commandment 2, which is don't point your gun at anything you're not willing to kill or destroy, was again violated repeatedly. As he worked on these grips, he just waved the muzzle of the gun around the room. And this is with a magazine in the gun. At one point, my son saw that coming and jumped under a table. So I don't know whether any of the stuff that I said that day, whether any of it got through to him. It made an impression on my son, I can tell you that. But days spent shooting with your dad and learning from your dad are supposed to be fond memories and many American kids cherish these memories and have these memories that they carry with them and share with their kids. I never got those memories. I never had those moments. So at age 42, this was my moment. And it was a memorable one. That I'll never forget it. Not because of the shooting, but the realization of just how much I had learned on my own and had passed on to my own son. So that's my Father's Day story. Again, happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Hope you have a great one. And we'll get started with our Father's Day special episode with Aaron Israel, who, interestingly enough, is not doing a Father's Day segment right here on Armed Lutheran Radio. Guys, let me take a moment to talk. I want to get a little serious here for a moment. Something really important that you need to consider if you carry a firearm for self-defense. You need to consider legal protection, because if you end up in a fight that ends up resulting in you having to discharge a firearm, even if you don't discharge your firearm, but go back and listen to my interview with Paul Lathrop a couple of years ago. Listen to my interview with Marcus Weldon last year. If you are involved in a self-defense shooting situation, even a situation where you threaten to use a gun but don't actually pull the trigger, you may end up in a legal fight after the fact. Even if you're cleared of all wrongdoing, you may find yourself being sued for simply defending yourself. You need to take precautions and to protect yourself and your family. And the way I do it, what I trust, is the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. Go to armedcitizensnetwork.org and check them out today. They provide legal protection. They provide money to get you out to cover bail. They provide initial retainers for attorneys. They recommend attorneys for your use in case you ever need to use this service. God forbid you ever do. We carry a gun every day because we hope we never have to use it. This is the same thing. It's a very small fee per year. It's absolutely worth it. Check them out, armedcitizensnetwork.org. It's the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. Use the promo code ARMEDLutheran25 and you'll save $25 off your first year's dues. Check them out today. Don't delay. If you're carrying a gun for personal protection, you cannot afford to not have some sort of legal protection as well. Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, armedcitizensnetwork.org.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to talk to you about a shooting that occurred at the end of May in Oklahoma City at Louis on Lake Hefner. This is a restaurant that I go to at least a few times a year. I've got a shop up there for my day job that I have to go check on, and so I end up eating there sometimes. And I've got a lot of friends who live in the area who were either close to or knew people who were close to the shooting, and so I wanted to dissect that and talk about some things that we could learn from it. So what happened is a crazed individual walked up and started shooting at the Louis restaurant. He shot the front door out, shot the glass out of the front door, and then came into the front part of the restaurant and just randomly opened fire at the patrons that were inside. Indications at first sounded to me like it might be some kind of a domestic violence overspill type thing, but it ended up being just a random shooting. And the guy had posted a lot of rantings on YouTube about being suicidal and some other crazy thoughts that he had, and so this was apparently a spree killer at work here. So the guy goes in, shoots the glass out, shoots a few people in the Louis, and then leaves the restaurant. Now, we don't know if he was fleeing or if he had just left the restaurant and was waiting to shoot more people. Even a month after the shooting, those details are not super clear. The police have released a couple of dash cam videos and body cam videos that don't really show a whole lot. But either way, he had left the restaurant. Now, after he had left the restaurant, there were two armed citizens that confronted him. One armed citizen was inside the restaurant, is my understanding, when it took place, but he didn't have his firearm on him. He wasn't carrying it for whatever reason, and he went back to his vehicle and retrieved his firearm and then confronted the suspect, who was in a little bit of a wooded area with a sidewalk that's right outside the restaurant. It's kind of a sidewalk walkway that walks around the lake area. There's a little lighthouse that you can walk to, and he was over in that area away from the restaurant when the armed citizen retrieved his gun out of his car in the parking lot and then approached the gunman. There was also another armed citizen who was not on the property at the time of the shooting, but was driving past the shopping center where the Louis is and saw that people were running around screaming and there was chaos going on, and he thought that there might be somebody who was injured that he needed to help. He thought maybe somebody was drowning in the lake, and so he has some medical training and a medical kit on him, which is all very good stuff, and so he went over there to render aid. So good on him for doing that. When he showed up on the scene, he was told by someone in the parking lot that there was a shooting taking place, and so he retrieved his firearm out of one of his bags somewhere in his vehicle and went to approach the shooter as well. So there were two armed citizens that did not coordinate with each other, didn't know that the other one was on the scene until after the shooting, as a matter of fact, who approached and ultimately took down the spree killer. He was killed. We're not sure how many shots were fired or anything like that, or if both of them hit the guy. We don't know any of the details on that haven't been released as of yet. But both of them engaged him. Both of them fired shots at him. And he was killed on the scene by those two armed citizens. So it was a positive outcome. And unfortunately, usually when there's a positive outcome like this, that's kind of where we stop as a gun community. We don't analyze the event any further, because to do so, some people take it as disrespect towards the people that were involved if you quote unquote Monday morning quarterback what they did. But I don't take that viewpoint at all. I think it's good to take a look at it and talk about some things that they could have done better, as well as talking about the things that they did well. So that's what I'm going to do. So first off, the first thing that comes to mind is the importance of carrying your firearm with you if you are allowed to carry it. As far as I know, that Louis restaurant does not prohibit concealed carry. I've certainly carried inside that restaurant before, and if they do post any signage that meets the letter of the law in Oklahoma, I've never noticed it. So I don't know if that's the case, that they prevent concealed carry. Maybe that's why you would leave your firearm in your car there. But either way, if you are legally allowed to and there's not some prohibition there, you need to carry your gun with you. Second off, you need to carry a medical kit, right? There were people injured. Luckily, no innocent people died on the scene. They were able to get emergency services to them quick enough. But you need to carry a medical kit and know how to use it. I talk about that frequently, and having the medical training and carrying the tools with you need to stop a traumatic bleed. That would come in come in handy if you're in this situation, whether you're armed or not. So you want to be able to be in a position where you can render aid to yourself or people who might be injured in that situation. So carry your gun, carry a medical kit, and those are things to think about. Definitely get that training and have those tools on you whenever you are legally allowed to, which a medical kit you can carry all the time, right? So even if you can't carry your gun, you can be ready to deal with the aftermath of one of these shootings, even if you don't have the opportunity to engage the bad guy. So the first thing that I'd say that I wouldn't recommend is going out to your vehicle and retrieving a firearm and returning to a chaotic scene of an active shooter, right? Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily quote-unquote wrong. I just don't think it's a best practice, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong when you do something like that. If you're able to get away from where the bad guy is and get to your vehicle, then you should probably stay away from the scene. You've already evaded. Get yourself to a position of advantage. Maybe arm yourself and stay at your vehicle, stay behind cover, and wait for your opportunity to engage the bad guy if he approaches you or something like that. But I don't think it's a great idea to go and grab your firearm and then go seek out the suspect. There's a lot of bad things that could happen. Law enforcement could respond, and you could be the guy with the gun in your hand. You could end up getting shot. We know there was another armed citizen that responded after this guy went and got his gun out of his car, so he could have been shot by the other armed citizen. There's all kinds of potential negative outcomes that can happen when you leave a scene, retrieve a weapon, and return to the scene. So in general, I don't think that is a good idea. Now, I'm glad that it was a positive outcome for this guy, and he ended up being able to take action that could have potentially saved lives. We don't know if this guy was going to continue his rampage, so he potentially saved some lives, and it was definitely a heroic action for him to seek out the shooter and engage him. But as a training TTP, I don't think it's really a good idea to have that as a response that you would plan to make in that situation. If you can get away from the bad guy and you get to your vehicle and you don't have your firearm, then stay in cover. And if you get your firearm out, stay in that position of advantage, stay in that position of cover, and don't go seek out the bad guy, because there's all kinds of ways that can go negative. The guy that showed up who was not on scene, first off, kudos to him for being a good Samaritan and being willing to show up to render aid, which is what he thought he was there to do, is to protect somebody from drowning, right? To save someone who maybe had fallen in the lake or some other medical emergency, and he had that medical kit and that training to be able to do that. So I think that's a positive that he was willing to do that. When he showed up and he got the information that the active shooter was on the property, that's a really chaotic event to walk into with very scant information. Now, we don't know if he could see the guy right away. We don't know all of the details about that, but we do know that he showed up. Someone tells him there's a shooting going on, and he gets a gun out of his vehicle, which he had his family with him in the vehicle. They were about to leave and go on a vacation, and they just happened to be driving past this spot. Me personally, if I show up on a scene like that, there's an active shooter, I mean, I'm going to stay in my vehicle, get out of Dodge, and call the police and be a good witness. That's going to be my planned response if I'm in a vehicle and I'm not involved in that situation to begin with. It might sound harsh, but Greg Ellifritz, one of the guys who I find a lot of my tips from, his website, activeresponsetraining.net, he often says, not my circus, not my monkeys. And honestly, that is a good approach to stay alive. And even though it might sound callous and harsh, it's reality, right? You're walking into a situation where you have scant information, you got your family in the car with you, and I can point to all kinds of negative outcomes where people have gotten involved, and it's not gone in a positive way. They've ended up getting killed or seriously injured in the response. So there's no guarantee that you're going to win the fight, which is something I always talk about. So if you're already in your vehicle, you're not involved in the situation, and you show up to render aid, unless you're right there automatically confronted by the shooter and need to respond to defend yourself and your family, I don't think it's a good idea to go seek him out with scant information, for the same reasons that I don't think it's a good idea to go back to your car, retrieve a firearm, and then walk back into a situation, because there's all kinds of ways that could go bad. You could get shot by the police, you could get shot by another armed citizen, you could get shot by another security guard, or you could lose the fight, and you really didn't need to respond. You could have let the police respond. Now, you can always make the case that their quick response and the fact that law enforcement took a few minutes to get there could have saved lives. Well, sure, yeah, you can make that case, and I'm glad that the outcome was positive. Like I said, I think the guys' actions were heroic, but you have to think about how it could have gone the other way, right? And would we be saying the same things if both of the armed citizens were laying on the pavement instead of the bad guy, right? So those are some things to consider as it relates to responding to an active shooter. If I go back to my vehicle, I'm going to stay at my vehicle. I'm going to stay in cover. If I get my weapon out, I'm going to have it right there and stay in cover and talk to the police on the phone. And if I get in a position where I have to defend myself, then I might take action, but I'm not going to go seek the bad guy out. And that especially holds true if you're just showing up on the situation in your vehicle. Stay in your vehicle, drive out of the parking lot, get to a position where you can watch what's happening, maybe render aid to people who need aid rendered to them, but stay behind cover, stay in a position where you're not in danger, and don't seek out that shooter is going to be your best TTP for surviving. Think about those principles of evade, barricade, respond that I often talk about. You can Google those and watch lots of videos about evade, barricade, respond, and you can see lots of things. Some other things to consider that came out in the story. One guy broke his leg fleeing the scene. The guy comes in, starts shooting, people start running towards the exit, and he broke his leg in the stampede trying to get out of the building. So that ought to tell you that you want to think about other methods of egress aside from going through the main doorway, right? You want to maybe think about going through the back kitchen entrance. If you jump over the counter and go through the kitchen, you're going to find a back door, right? Knowing where those other methods of escape are aside from going out where all the stampede is taking place, because you can get injured, and if that shooter was still in the area and wanted to shoot the guy who broke his leg, that could have gone really badly for the guy who evaded through the front door. So think about alternate ways to evade when you're in the public space, and know how to get to those exits, and think about that unconventional approach to getting out of there and evading when you can. But once again, Google evade, barricade, respond, follow those principles. But there's a lot of stuff we can learn here. But I always want to say in closing that I'm not saying anything bad against the guys who responded. They did pretty well. Both of them, one guy was former military and one guy was a former law enforcement, apparently. So they may have felt more compelled to get involved because of their background. And that's another thing to think about as well, is that your emotions sometimes might compel you to do things that your rational brain, if you really think about it ahead of time, wouldn't lead you to do. So let your rational brain win out. But I understand why they got involved, and I'm glad they did, and I'm glad that they had a positive outcome. But there's a lot of things that you can learn if you ever find yourself in that situation. Think about these things ahead of time, and you can make better decisions. And just remember, there's no guarantees in these fights, so if you can avoid them, that's going to be your best thing to do. That's your personal defense tip for the week. Thanks for tuning in.
Aaron Israel is a Personal Defense Network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
Hey, if you're like me, you like shopping at gun shows. No pressure from sales staff, no need to bother them to ask to look at stuff. You just pick stuff up and dry fire it and look at it and hold it. Imagine if you could get that experience at your local gun store, where you don't need to bother anybody. You don't have to ask people for help if you don't need it. You don't have salespeople hovering over your shoulders. Well, this is what it's like when you shop at G4G Guns. Cassie and Patrick Coburn are the owners, and you've heard them on the program before. They are absolutely awesome people, and they'll help you find exactly the right gear for you. But there's no sales pressure. You just browse the store, you pick up and hold anything that you want to look at without asking permission, just like at the gun show. And once you've found the gun you want, or if you actually do need assistance, Patrick and Cassie are there to help. It's the best of both worlds, gun shop and gun show, in one place. It really is the best. G4G Guns. They're located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. They're open Mondays from 1 to 6, Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7, and on the weekends you'll find them at a gun show near you. Or check them out online at G4G Guns. That's G, the number 4, G, guns.com. G4G Guns, the gallery for great guns. G4GGuns.com.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstein.
Hey there, hi there, guys. I hope that you had a wonderful Father's Day weekend. I have been having a great one. I've been at another conference, but this weekend I'm actually getting to spend Father's Day with my father-in-law, who is a wonderful man. And unfortunately, I lost my dad 6 years ago to cancer. So, dear dads, please, here's a big tip to you. Please go get your health checkups so that you can catch things before they become a little too advanced for any treatment. On that note, I wanted to share some tips because I was very close to my dad. I was a daddy's girl. I still am a daddy's girl, even though he's not here anymore. I wanted to tell you about the importance of a dad in a young woman's life. It has been proven over and over again, the statistics show that the percentages of women who are successful in their lives, they have had key influential men and their father figures as they were growing up. And so that is something that's very important. So dads, make sure that you spend time with your daughters and be a positive figure in their life, not a critical one. So always be reinforcing and positive. That doesn't mean that you need to let the kids run your life, but be an influential figure and always be there. One thing about my childhood was that I grew up in a rural area. My dad had firearms. He's the one who introduced me to guns. He did so because my brother was about 5 years older than me. And when he taught my brother how to shoot, he knew that I would see this going on and I'd become curious. And I know I've talked a little bit about this in past episodes, but I need to tell you again, and especially hopefully we have some new listeners since then, but I was 5 years old when he taught me how to shoot my brother's pellet gun, and he taught me safety. He taught me the importance of how to use the gun and also what they were for, and basically that they weren't toys. So I knew at a very young age, back then, we didn't even have our guns locked up. I just knew they weren't toys. I knew that if I touched them, even if my dad didn't know, I was going to be in trouble. This is something of a respect issue that my dad had a great knack of putting that into us. So we were very safe with the guns and never had any incidents. And on that note, when I got older, when I was in middle school, my parents divorced. It could have been a tragic time in my life, but it wasn't. Our parents communicated to us. We understood. My mother and I, we moved to the big city of San Diego. When we moved there, it was a whole new world to me because going from this small country town to the big city, it was, somewhat exciting, somewhat scary, but also, it was a learning time, and something that I learned while I was there, I learned while I was walking home from school one day with my cousin. As we were walking around the corner on the way to the house, we saw this house that had police caution tape around it. And of course, we were very curious, being adolescent girls, we were going, what happened? All these things go through your mind. Well, what we find out later was that there were two of our friends. They were in that house, and one of them found the parents' gun, and they had not been taught what the guns were for. They had not been taught safety. They had not been taught the respect. The parents had instead chosen to hide the firearms from those kids. So unfortunately, what happened is they became curious. They had seen guns on television. They didn't know what they were for. The gun was, of course, grabbed. One child shot the other child, and that story ended in tragedy. That is when I realized how blessed I was that my father had empowered me with knowledge, and he had empowered me to know what firearms were for, what tools they were, not that they were toys, and also not that they were scary. He taught me respect for those guns. So, dads, empower your children. And of course, I said I'm a daddy's girl. Whether it's a daughter or a son, you've got to teach your kids. Don't hide things from them. Knowledge is power. So on this Father's Day weekend, I want to encourage you to empower your children. Find that appropriate time, that appropriate age. As I said, my brother was older. It was appropriate to teach me at 5 years old firearm safety and respect. So in your household, you will have to determine when the appropriate time is to teach them this wonderful gift of responsibility. On this weekend, please take that into consideration. If you haven't yet taught your child and you think they're old enough, take them to the range. We have wonderful weather this summer. Maybe you've got some cool mornings or evenings, and maybe you can start by showing them the Eddie Eagle program on NRA's website. Maybe you can start teaching them firearm safety at home with inert guns, stuff like that. There's a lot of ways to get them into shooting before you actually head out to the range. Maybe you'll want to have them come and watch you. I know Lloyd did that with his daughter. She got to do timer and other activities. So look to that as a way to empower your children, and always remember the rules of safety and head out there and enjoy your time with your children, because sometimes it means a big difference when they've grown up and moved out of the house, or in my situation, when my dad is gone. He's empowered me to reach out and help teach others, and I hope that you can do the same. Happy Father's Day.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstein.com.
Let me take a moment to tell you about our membership site, the Reformation Gun Club. Members get exclusive content, all the segments, full-length interviews, full-length episodes of Clinging to God and Guns with extra content not released previously. They're kind of like the movies with the extended cuts or the director's cuts. Oftentimes what we have to do is trim those segments down so we can fit them into a reasonable time in the show, and that means extra content for you as a member of the Reformation Gun Club. You get access to our closed Facebook group, discounts from our partners like Gunbox gun safes, easy-to-see targets, Dowtech Force, Cook's holsters, Talon gun grips, inline fabrication, much more. So go check it out on Patreon. We've moved to Patreon. Registration is much easier. You get your own unique RSS feed, which means you can paste that into your favorite podcast app and take it with you and listen anywhere. For as little as $2 a month, you can take advantage of all of those benefits and help support the show. Visit patreon.com/armedlutheran or go to gunclub.armedlutheran.us and sign up today.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
Hey everybody, this is Sergeant Bill. This is your Ballistic Minute. So with Father's Day coming up, wanted to do a Ballistic Minute about being a father and learning and teaching gun safety. So when I was growing up, there were no firearms in my home. My father was ex-military. He was very strict. He taught us safety with a lot of different things, but there were no guns in the house, so I didn't really get any firearms training or safety training or advice or anything until I was an adult. But now here I am with two small kids of my own, 5 and 7, and I've got to teach them how to respect firearms and what they're for and all that good stuff. So that's something that I do, and do it on a really often basis. My children, I try to demystify the firearms for them so that, they don't think that it's some big scary tool, which it is a tool, and it can be scary, but so can a hammer or a wrench if you're not using it right in the wrong hands. We've gone over gun safety, pointing in a safe direction, keeping your finger off the trigger, how to handle them, how to take care of them, when to use them, when not to use them, what they're for, and all of that. My son has been out to the rifle range shooting a Ruger 1022 a few months ago, and he had a ball. He's been asking to go back ever since. And since school just got out for him a few weeks ago, that's probably coming up again here real soon. My daughter doesn't have as much interest, but she still learns all that she can as far as safety and handling. So whenever she feels like it's time for her to go to the range with Daddy, then that's what she'll do. I'm a big proponent of leading by example or teaching by example. So I know that I've always learned visually is the best way for me to learn. I see somebody do something, that I can do it just like them, or try to do it, try to emulate them. And that's something that I do with my job, with my life, and with my kids. I try to be the leader, be the parent, and be the responsible person that I want them to be. So practice gun safety. Make it more than just a habit when you're handling firearms. Make it a conscious effort. And teach your children. Start them out at whatever age you feel appropriate, and they'll learn, and they'll have a good appreciation and knowledge of firearms and firearm safety. I'm Sergeant Bill. This has been your Ballistic Minute. Happy Father's Day.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
Hey, if you need a good holster, let me take a minute to tell you about my good friends at Cook's Holsters. If you've got a need for a holster for a carry gun, for competition, for a day at the range, check out Cook's Holsters at cooksholsters.com. They're American-made Kydex holsters, custom-made for your specific firearm with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. And trust me, they stand by that guarantee. I know because I've seen it in action. Great people. You've heard Bob Cook on the podcast a couple of times over the last couple of years. He usually comes in at the end of the year on our Christmas show and talks about what's new for the coming year. He makes a fantastic product, and you will not be disappointed. Trust me, I have been using their holsters for years. I found them when I started doing reviews of holsters back when, in the pre-podcast days, back when I was blogging, and I love the product, and I trust it with my own life. You should give them a shot as well. Check them out at cooksholsters.com. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and get 10% off your order. Check them out, cooksholsters.com today.
Up next, we're clinging to God and guns with Pastor John Bennett.
Hey folks, this is Pastor John Bennett. And this Father's Day, reflecting on my experiences growing up, I really didn't have much exposure to firearms whatsoever when I was a child. The most exposure I ever had is when, snooping in my parents' closet, I managed to find my father's unsecured Ruger Security 6. Now, fortunately, I at least had the good sense not to play around with it, but all my childhood, from that point forward, from time to time, whenever I had the notion, I would just go in and take a peek at it because, hey, I was a kid and I thought it was neat. Now, what I've learned from this as a parent myself is the importance of securing my firearms and preventing my own children from unauthorized access to them. Now, aside from that, I've had more exposure to firearms with my father-in-law than I ever did with my own dad. My father-in-law, for an ordination gift, he handed down to me his Marlin lever action 30-30 as an ordination gift. Something that I will treasure for the rest of my life and hand down to my own son. When I reflect on just the joy that I've had in shooting with my father-in-law and talking guns with him and that sort of thing, it really is a tremendous joy. And that is a joy that I intend to pass down to my own children as I have the joy of teaching my daughters and my son to shoot and introducing them to firearm safety and the like, so that I can give my own children the experience that I didn't have but should have as a child myself. A very blessed Father's Day to all of you, and happy Father's Day, Dad.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org.
And that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you all for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. Thank you to our fine sponsors who make all this possible. Thank you to my awesome cast of contributors. And thank you, dear listener, for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. I hope you'll join us again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.